My name's Monique Faleafa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a national manager for a Pacific Health Workforce Development organisation called LEVAR within a non-government organisation called TPO. We're really coming from a strength-based approach this morning, so we want this session to focus on embracing hope and moving forward, remembering to ponder and reminisce those good memories. We want to talk about what support is available and highlight how friends and whānau find ways to continue on and celebrate the life of their loved ones.
Good morning, my name is Mark Wilson. I am a coordinator for a support group in Auckland called Solace. It's a peer support group for people who've lost loved ones to suicide. My own personal story, I lost my wife 5.5 years ago. She was 6 months pregnant. And she lost both her sisters to suicide as well. So I knew a lot about suicide and the impact of suicide on a family. And when it happened to me personally, it was the worst thing clean in the world that can never happen to anyone. But I'm now in a new relationship and I'm a father of a 6-month-old baby. So I fully and 100% believe in hope. And the despair of losing someone you love to suicide, it goes. Zita sits with me, is with me every day, and will be until the day I die. But I have a new life, I have a wonderful life, and I had a wonderful life. Zita, in a way, enabled me to be here today, standing to talk to and listen and learn and share. Zita had set up Solace herself, along with a couple of other people in Auckland, following her sister's deaths. And I found myself getting more and more involved and helping out in that, given I'd had no personal experience, apart from the fact I was supporting my wife at that time. And the sadness of all this is that Zita knew about the pain of losing someone, and she knew how painful it would be for me, but she'd given me so much to enable me. I had the resilience, I had, the resources to deal with this, and I think to me that's so important that we have the resources for those of us who have lost somebody. And I talked to probably many hundreds of people over the last 7 or 8 years who've lost a loved one, and that's often what they miss out on, is having someone who will listen. And it takes time. And hopefully Solace does that for people in Auckland. We're not funded by any organisation. We're a group of people who have all lost someone dear to us, but we meet monthly, and we have done for the last 7 or 8 years, and I think it provides a much needed platform for people.
As a suicide survivor, I had a teaching and youth work background, and in that capacity had worked alongside families impacted by suicide, never thinking it would happen to me. And when it did, I remember the first thought I had, because my husband was a church minister, my first thought was, I'll tell them it was a heart attack. And then I have this vivid memory of thinking I'm either going to walk through the next period of time with my head down, or I'm going to look up and I'm going to stare that suicide in the face. It was really scary, but I knew intuitively that's what I had to do. My children were very young, and as they've grown, 2 out of my 3 have at different times had suicide as a clear and present danger, which has been extremely scary. My husband, similarly to your wife, he lost a brother through suicide himself and had a huge amount of loss in his life. I guess when I started working at Skylight, it was just as a volunteer, because I knew that bereavement was tough. And I guess because I was a teacher and information has always empowered me, I wanted to be a part of making sure others got some information that really helped them shift what was going on in their heads. So as time's progressed, I now am the Deputy Chief Executive at Skylight in Newtown, Wellington. We're based in Wellington but have a national reach, and our specialty area is loss and grief and trauma and supporting families and all ages through it. and that's enabled me to be able to develop some practical resources and information around suicide prevention and postvention and partnering with others. So that's what brings me here today.
Ko tai mai mātou ki te tautoko te kaupapa whakahirahira o tēnei hui. I'm here to support this kaupapa. Ko te reo he tapu, ko te reo he rongoa, ko te reo he mana mutahake. Now what I love about that is that there is no, it doesn't say we're here to talk about suicide. It says we're here to talk about hope and life and self-determination. Kua hau, ko te kaiwhakahaere o the kaimahi, or I have lots of names, with the Clinical Advisory Services of Aotearoa, or CASA for short. Our mahi is around cluster suicides and contagions. And my mahi is to work alongside the very talented and amazing team of clinical social workers and clinical psychologists. But more importantly is to work alongside iwi, Māori communities, who are suffering with the mamae or the hurt of loss within their communities. And what we get is that, you know, it's not just a problem for the whānau or hapu or iwi, or the DHB, or the mental health services who respond, or the victim support. It's a hapori or a community challenge. And I'm always amazed at the generosity and the aroha of the whānau and the hapu and iwi as they come together to try and stamp out or find out or learn or share with each other. My passion is tino rangatiratanga, really. Transformation, empowerment of all peoples. But for some reason I do get pulled into our Māori whānau always. I've been in the health services for over 40 years. How old am I? I'm 60 now. I've been a nurse, I've been a manager, I've been an educator, I've worked in transformation, I've led seminars, training, and always I'm pulled back to empowerment and transformation and possibility. So in the midst of all this, there's always possibility and transformation and positive things come out of them, and we'll talk more about that later. I have 3 adult children and 3 mokopuna. I have 7 mokopuna, aroha mai, 7 mokopuna. My eldest is 22, and he has a few problems he's dealing with that I've had to get some help for him. And my youngest mokopuna is 3 weeks old, yesterday. Her name is Te Wai Ora, or Te Ao Marama. Princess Wai to us. And my strategy for our whānau is I often thank my kids for giving me such talented, beautiful, genius mokos. Of course, in my eyes they are. My mokos are my life, my blood. And we are truly blessed.
Kia ora tātou. Just a little bit of an addition to what's written about me in the booklet. I hail from Ngāpuhi, from Te Mahurehure. I come from a little family of 23. Okay, so we learned from an early stage how to survive and how to help one another, how to support one another, the manaaki, aroha, and all that type of thing. I was brought up in that situation. I was brought up holding on to the nannies' skirts and all that sort of thing, and learnt from them. I'm a popular guy because everyone is dying to see me. Currently I'm a funeral director and that type of situation. So, but a bit like my colleague here, a bit of a Mitsubishi, you know, I've done this, I've done that, I've done a lot of things, and I've experienced a lot of things. I guess one could call myself as a practitioner in many aspects of life, including suicide. Being a funeral director, you get right into the nitty-gritty of the happenings and to the prior of the happenings. And since I was invited to come to this conference, I have done 4 case studies on suicide that I have been given the honor of taking care of the loved ones. And that was a very, very interesting exercise, which I would like to share with this conference today, because it's quite diverse in terms of each individual cases that I actually interviewed. I guess in one sense I'm fortunate to be commissioned to take care of a loved one, and because of that, the legal documentation that needs to be filled in, we have to have all the details of what happened. Being a funeral director and a counsellor and a consultant, I cover all this. I have a number of hats that I wear. I work with the police, training the police in tikanga Māori when it comes pertinent to mate ohorere, sudden death and things of that nature. And with that, I believe it's a doorway for me to be able to approach those families and to do the case studies that I had carried out.
I just have one question from the panel at the moment, and I'm just going to cut to the chase because the topic is about hope and support after the loss of a loved one, and it was mentioned that it's really nice to have this positive spin on things. So a key question for me was, how do you look for positives among the tragedy?
The first positive you'll always find is there's been a life that's worth celebration. The lifetime might not have been as long as we all wanted, but it's a life of value and worth, and always worth celebrating. So the focus cannot be always on how a person died, but really how they lived and how they were loved.
I agree with that. I think in the early days, the focus is on the suicide and how they died, and that relentless telling of that story that I think is required. But then for me personally, it was suddenly that horrible cliche, time as a healer. It dawned on me that there was hope. I had a brand new canvas, my life. I had to recreate my life. The life I was having with Zita and myself was over, so I had to start marking something else. And I took that on. It was a great challenge of just rebuilding, recreating, and forever always having that healthy feelings of Zita and how she would be responding to what I was doing. And then I went, well, wait a minute. Often I would check in with myself and I'd say, it's my decision now. I've got to move on with my life. You're no longer here. I know that some things I did she probably didn't like, the amount of money I was spending, and some of them I was going out too much and all that sort of stuff. But, that was a healing thing for me. I needed to go out, and I think connecting with friends and family and the community is so important. And you can't do this alone. And the thing about suicide to me is it's very isolating, and you're left alone, and there's no rule book about what you're meant to do. And I'd had a lot of experience with suicide grief prior to Zita dying, and suddenly I was having to start my life again without any really I never thought about it, never imagined it would happen to me, but it did. And here I am 5.5 years later, still, I think, with a wonderful life. And the loss of Zita was a huge part of my life, but it's not a negative part of my life anymore. And I think that's the amazing thing about suicide, that perhaps sets it apart from other deaths, maybe.
Working with communities, it can be very complex. We have whānau, the individuals grieving, the whānau grieving, and it becomes a community grief. And the positives that come out of a tragedy such as this, because we're dealing with more than one suicide in a community. And of course there's a lot of grief everywhere, and we're working alongside them. The positives are coming together. Whānau hapu iwi coming together. And not only whānau hapu iwi, but community groups, it may be for the first time they've actually talked to each other. Because it is a coordinated response when we're dealing with something as tragic as this, that we all must come together. A contagion, or what we call a contagion, demands it, that we work together effectively and communicate with each other. So the positives are huge. It's a time of possibility out of the tragedy, that we get to know each other, we get to kōrero with each other, we get to manaaki each other, we get to, it's all around kotahitanga, self-determination. We can do it. We don't, we have the tools and we have the ability to be able to look after our rangatahi. We, and whakapono, operating from honesty and integrity, bringing integrity in a sense of, making sense of it all. And it takes time, but there is always hope. Always, and exactly what Mike is saying, whether it's from an individual, community, whānau, hapu, iwi perspective, there is always hope. So the positives that come out of that.
From my own experience interviewing in the cases that I had carried out, asking the right questions, make sure you prepare your questions, keep their minds active by your questioning. All the time, if only. Quite often they say, if only, if only, if only. So you talk about hindsight. If you know what to look for in your questioning, think you could have helped, be honest, and I support. Trust, it's a very important factor when you're interviewing these people. And unless you get their trust, they won't open up to you. And that has been evident with the case studies that I have done.
Mike, my question is, and it's about the role of the tangiwito in terms of the positive process, as I understand it, was of opening up a pathway, absorbing the grief. I come from a line of tangiwito, that's our whakapapa. And my understanding of that role is that the woman held that role of tangiwito and were able to absorb the grief of the hapu when somebody had passed away and then let it go. And they were knowledgeable of the workings of Te Ao Wairua, the spiritual world. I wonder about that practice, whether you see it in your work, whether there's been any attempts to revitalise the role of the tangiwito in contemporary times.
Thank you.
From the case studies that I carried out, yes, that is evident, and yes, the community contributes and they support, even to the stage that one of them have invited me to go back to their iwi, to their hapu, to talk about te taha wairua when it comes to suicide. And at this stage, I haven't said yes yet, but the chances are I will, because I have a passion for this kaupapa as well.
I'm here today because my younger brother committed suicide a year and a half ago. But my question is, not for a specific person, but for the whole panel, how do you change the viewpoint from being a victim or almost a burden to reaching out for support from family and friends?
I think everybody's different. We're all wired for grief. It's a natural part of life, but we're all going to grieve in different ways. So some people might be ready for that at different times. I think it's true that when there is a giving out and a reaching out, that there's a win-win, not only for yourself, but for those who are sitting at the ready, so desperate to give you support. I remember vividly someone coming round to visit our family and coming over and saying, is there anything I could do? And I said, look, no, it's fine. And in the end, my mother turned around and said, oh, for heaven's sake, let them mow the lawns. Because, so many people want to be able to help. It's a personal journey, so maybe just encouragement and offers not just given once, but given more than once. I think sometimes people don't reach out for support many months or even years later. And I work at Skylight. We regularly see people who have been bereaved many, many years, if not decades before, by suicide. And it's taken them that long for their heads to get into the place where they can reach out. So I guess we don't judge each other, we just keep being encouraging and supportive as best we can.
After an unsuccessful suicide attempt, how do we support those people well, and how do we talk about suicide with those people so that it reduces their risk of attempting again, basically?
My gut feeling is that the more we learn about suicide and the nature of suicide as best we can, we get some clues. So, for example, I've really come to understand the roles of things like serotonin, the brain chemicals that can play havoc with people's ability to think through things clearly, and how easy it is for those of us who aren't feeling that way to judge and say, you know, pull yourself together and stop feeling sorry for yourself, and, you know, don't you know how lucky and blessed you are, etc., and forget that those who are suicidal and have attempted suicide and perhaps are experiencing mental illness or huge situational crisis, how dare we judge their pain? So we have to be very compassionate.
It's a bit out of my territory, but I always say to people, because occasionally I'll get phone calls, because there's a lot of people out there, family members who are frightened of their loved ones who have attempted and they don't know where to go, and they often end up calling me at Solace, and which is always, I think, frightening that there isn't really a place where a lot of people can go, family members, to get that much needed support. But anyway, I just run through that checklist of making sure that that person who's vulnerable is getting the right, immediate, important attention that they so clearly need.
In your experience, are there things that people say that might be unhelpful?
I'd like to speak from a personal perspective here. What was unhelpful at times? My sister attempted suicide after, I'm going back a few years now, she's since passed away. And the biggest thing I think for the whānau was that fear and that not knowing what to do. We were absolutely terrified that she'd even tried to do this, and we didn't know that she was about to do that, which is what suicide is, isn't it? We don't know. If they came out and told us that they were suicidal, we could give them help, and of course we would get them help. But I remember my mother in particular being really almost closing down. She was actually immobilised with absolute fear about what had happened. And we all came together as whānau, not only us, and I remember my aunties and uncles and the whole marae coming to awhi us. It could have totally gone the other way where Mum would have just shut it down and not told anyone, but she actually rang her uncle and the kaumātua at the marae, and they came and awhi us. But I remember going to the hospital. She was put in hospital because it was pretty close. And I remember sitting with her, and she just stood looking at the window and saying, you know, I don't know why I didn't succeed. She kept questioning her own reasons why it didn't happen. How come I'm still alive? And at that time, what was helpful was just to be with her and just to listen. Whakarongo, 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 aroha, aroha, aroha. Get rid of the platitudes. Don't say, I know how you feel. You know, because we don't. I had no idea how she felt. Not giving advice is unhelpful. Like, you know, yes, you know, why don't we take you to the week and do this? And also telling others about your own, if you're with somebody who is either grieving or has been through attempt, not going over our own past grieving, can be unhelpful. What is helpful is just being with them. And awhi the whānau, take kai, take koha, be with the whānau.
Hi, my name's Denise. I'm here at the conference today because I'm a person who has mental illness, and I've survived a lot of suicide attempts when I was younger, but about 8 years ago, so when I was younger, a lot of the suicide attempts were very impulsive, and as the gentleman up there said, they were a way of communicating, and I didn't know how to, you know, they were reactive. But about 8 years ago, I got to a different point in my life where I was very conscious about what I was doing, and I decided to commit suicide, and I didn't tell anybody. I knew that by telling anybody, people would stop me, and I was pretty determined, and I went about planning it for about 3 months. And as you can see, I'm still here 8 years later. But there was some big changes in my family, made a big difference. But the one thing the comment I wanted to make to the panel, and to get any feedback on it, is there was nothing that my family could have done when I was at that stage. That was a decision for when I changed my mind. There was actually some things that happened that made a difference to me at that point, but they were coincidental. Something that one of my aunties said, and something that one of the family members, a friend of mine, said did make a difference. And the fact that I was aware of how it would affect my family made a big difference.
For me, personally, my experience, I didn't have any guilt. I had supported Zita unconditionally. I felt for a long period of her very difficult and family experience, and then her own mental illness. And I think in a way that was really helpful for me in my recovery was that I didn't have that guilt, which sits with a lot of suicide survivors, and people tend to perhaps focus on the last time they saw their loved one. They might have had words may have been said, or there was issues around that, and that's very traumatic and can last a long time with the survivor. But yeah, I do sometimes think, and for a while there I would think about what more could I have done for Zita, and I honestly believe that there wasn't anything more, and that's desperately sad, but it's also shows her where she was at and what she did. So, and I have to respect that for her.
I think for me, I certainly came to understand that, but in the early days, took it on myself to check that out. Was there things I could have seen? And one of the things I personally found helpful was really good information that helped me understand just what you're saying, is that sometimes, you can't see, but that there are also other times, like you've suggested, that we can see indications, and there are things that we can do to prevent it. Talking about the if-onlys, I think it's important to remember that any kind of sudden, accidental, tragic death will lead survivors to have if-onlys. If only I hadn't got them to go down to get the milk from the shop, they wouldn't have been in the car, and they wouldn't have been in that car accident. It's a natural response after sudden, unexpected and tragic death. And also, it's not just family, of course. I had a fascinating conversation with our butcher down the road who said to me, he'd been racking his brains, could he have said something to my husband when he'd last come to get some meat from his shop? And I'm thinking, well, why would you be thinking that? But we all do. It's our way of making sense. We're meaning makers as human beings, and we want to make meaning on and sense of what it is that's happening. And I think you're right, there are things that families can't do and friends can't do, but we still intuitively need to process that and think about it, just in case there is some meaning that can be made. And for myself, what I have gained is making sure that my 3 children understand the possibility of genetic flow-through of depression through the family, and our need to be a family that has not so much pride that we can ask for help when we need it. So that's how it's flowed through for us. So when my kids have struggled, I have been grateful that they have learned to ask for help.
Yeah, there is a possibility or even a probability that you will get some cases where the indicators are there and the families tried all sorts to try and help. I'm again speaking with one of the case studies that I did, where the spirituality was very, very strong, very strong. Okay, the indicators were there that he had spiraled down, changes in his whole mood. Both the mother and the son, the mother was treating the son, trying to get help. She went to the medical professions and to be told there was an imbalance, given pills to try and help him. Went to another section of the hospital to be told that he was okay, and she didn't believe that, so she went back to her tohunga, went back to her people, and tried to get them to help and to be told, and this was something very, very new to me. I had no idea that this sort of thing was happening, that in this particular area, every 5 generations goes through a period of suicide, murder, rape, and all those types of things, every 5 generations. And she actually, with her son, was in that category, and explaining to me that there were a number of families in that particular area that sort of thing happened. And my next question to her was, is there anything being done about that situation?
Just a question on relation to hope and support after loss of a loved one. How important, how much emphasis or encouragement is given to the whole spiritual aspect of life? You know, like prayer, fellowship, worship, healing.
I create my own questioning. I derive my questioning from my own experience. And as you are dealing with the client, it's there that the indication may show that spirituality needs to be included in the interview. It just happens during the questioning. And that's why I said earlier on, get your questions ready, be sincere in your questioning, make sure that you are sensitive to the whole situation, not there just as from a clinical approach, so to speak. Excuse me, I'm not disrespecting anyone here, but it's a reality that more often than not is as you are questioning, each question may change. It depends on how they respond to your question. But yes, in 2 of my cases, spirituality was very, very strong in it.
And I'd like to tautoko that where the spirituality and the karakia is vital before we even talk about the kaupapa on the table when we're working with communities. It can, when you're working with particularly mainstream communities, they can just launch straight into the mahi at hand, and sometimes we have to stop them and say, you know, karakia, mihi mihi. So that is vital if we're to get the work done, to have our karakia, our waiata, our hamene, that mihi whakatau, and to clear the air, clear the space so that the mahi can take place. So kia ora koutou.
Yeah, I think intuitively, when there's been a suicide, people, their spirituality, however they define that, their place in the universe, is challenged. And so people often will look to big spiritual questions. It's a very natural way of processing what's happened. For me, it was hugely supportive and helpful. For some people, it might be enough to go and be in nature by themselves and to think about everything that's going on just alone with nature around them, supporting them. Everybody's so different, but you're right, I think it sits right very close in the experience of many people bereaved by suicide. It's very important.
Definitely, for me it was a spiritual awakening, I guess. I'd never even contemplated life, the universe and meaning and all that stuff, and then suddenly I was confronted with it head on. So I have learned so much about myself, I guess, from that, and it challenged me like nothing else has challenged me, losing the person you love, and where are they, how do I sit with their memory and their loss, and it's made me a better person, I think, just getting in touch with that part of me, because it wasn't something I'd ever really contemplated.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Just a few thoughts, 30 seconds on a few thoughts. In tragedy, there is hope. Mike pointed out that after the loss of a loved one, there is a point in time where hope is created, and that can be a different point in time for different people. Tricia mentioned there is a life worth celebrating and remembering how they lived, and good information is really, really important and a valuable source of support. And as Eliza pointed out, a coordinated approach after the loss means that whānau and groups can come together, connect, and have collective support, whether that be spiritual or otherwise. Whawhatai tele lava soifua ma ia manuia.